All right, so today we're diving into something pretty deep.
Yeah.
We're looking at the book of Hebrews,
Okay.
chapter 8 specifically,
Right.
and this idea of a new covenant.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it'll be interesting for us to kind of unpack what makes this covenant superior
Right.
to the old one.
Yeah. And why this is such a big deal, even, thousands of years after this was written.
Yeah.
Why does this still resonate with people? Why is it still relevant?
Yeah, right off the bat, we're introduced to Jesus, but not just as like the Son of God, but as a high priest.
Right.
And not just any high priest, but like the high priest
Priest.
who sits at the right hand of God in heaven.
Right.
And that imagery is just like,
Yeah. It's striking.
Yeah.
It really is.
so how significant is that? Like, what's the big deal with Jesus being called a high priest?
Well, I mean, in the Old Testament, the high priest was like the super important figure, right? Like the mediator between God and the people. And here you have Jesus being presented as a high priest, but like a different kind of high priest.
Like on a whole other level.
Exactly. He's not in like an earthly temple or anything.
Right.
He's in like what Hebrews calls the true tabernacle in heaven.
Oh, okay.
So like this is this idea that the true reality is not something we can build with our hands. Like it's something spiritual and transcendent.
So something beyond our comprehension.
Yeah, in a way.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get that. But then there's this little detail in verse 3 that kind of caught my eye. It says, even Jesus, as this high priest, had to have something to offer. So, like, what's that about? What did he have to offer?
Well, that's where the idea of sacrifice comes into play.
Okay.
But we're not talking about animal sacrifices like in the Old Covenant.
Right.
Jesus' offering is himself,
Okay.
his perfect life and his death on the cross.
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes like the basis for this new covenant.
All right, so speaking of the Old Covenant, verse 7 kind of makes it clear that there was, like, a problem with it.
Uh-huh.
It says that the first covenant was faulty.
Right.
So what was wrong with the Old Covenant?
Well, the Old Covenant, refers back to the one that God made with Moses and the Israelites at Mount Sinai.
Mm-hmm.
It was all about the law,
Right.
the 10 Commandments, and this whole system of sacrifices to, like, atone for sin.
Okay.
But according to Hebrews, that system had its limits.
Okay.
Like, it couldn't really change people's hearts.
Okay.
It just kind of changed their outward actions.
So it was kind of like a Band-Aid solution, like
Yeah.
addressing the symptoms but not really getting at the root cause.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And verse 5 kind of reinforces this by comparing the earthly tabernacle to just a sketch and shadow of the heavenly one.
Mm-hmm.
So the old covenant was like this glimpse of something greater,
Okay.
but it wasn't the full picture.
All right, so we've got this new covenant built on Jesus' sacrifice, and it's supposed to be like way better than the old one.
Right.
But what exactly does it offer that the old covenant didn't? Verses 8 through 12 lay out some pretty specific promises, so like what are those?
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. The new covenant promises this like incredible internal transformation.
Okay.
We're not just talking about external rules written on tablets, but like God's laws actually being written on our hearts and minds.
Wow.
It talks about everyone knowing God directly without needing priests or intermediaries.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe like the most important thing it says is that God forgives sins completely and remembers them no longer.
Wow. That's a huge shift.
Yeah.
Like it's not about following rules out of fear, but about a real change of heart and a genuine relationship with God.
Absolutely. It like totally changes the focus from just doing the right things to becoming the right kind of person.
But if the law is written on our hearts, does that mean that we automatically know right from wrong? Or how does this internal transformation, like how does it actually play out in our daily lives?
That's a great question.
Like in our decision making, in our relationships, in just like how we live.
Yeah, that gets to the heart of what it means to actually live under this new covenant.
Okay.
It's not like this magical download of information,
Right.
but like this ongoing process
Okay.
of transformation where our desires and motivations are slowly being aligned with God's will.
All right. So that makes sense. But what happens to the old covenant then? The last verse of the chapter says it's obsolete and fading away. So does that mean that the Old Testament is just irrelevant now?
That's a question that people have been trying to figure out for like centuries.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
The text isn't saying that we should just like completely ignore the Old Testament.
Okay.
Instead, it's saying that the new covenant is like the fulfillment of what the old one was pointing towards.
I see.
So think of it this way. The seed contains the potential for the tree.
Mm-hmm.
But once the tree is fully grown, you don't need the seed in the same way anymore.
So it's like the old covenant was preparing the way for something even better, and now that the new covenant is here, we can see the full picture.
Exactly.
Okay, I think I'm getting it.
It's not about erasing the past, but about understanding it in light of this new reality.
This has been really helpful.
Good.
So just to recap,
Yeah.
we've learned that Jesus is the high priest of this new superior covenant, right?
Right.
And it offers true forgiveness, internal transformation,
Yeah.
and a direct relationship with God.
Yeah, that's a great summary.
Okay, good.
And I think it leaves us with a lot to think about. Like, if this new covenant promises such a radical change, how should that change the way we live?
Yeah.
What does it actually mean for us to have God's law written on our hearts? And I don't mean just in some theoretical sense, but in a way that really shapes our thoughts, our actions, and our relationships. That's something I hope everyone listening will really think about.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
All right, see you then.